Okay, welcome back everybody. Thanks for your patience. Just a couple of minutes break there. Yeah, obviously that first talk was highly relevant because I see a lot of people on their mobile phones for the checking some sort of messaging application. So let's move on. I'm really excited about this next speaker as well. I've got a passion for agile as well as mobile. Let me introduce Alex Gamble. Alex is the product lead at PwC Ventures Hub. He has helped a variety of businesses from small startups to big corporates develop user-centered and innovative products. Alex has recently written an ebook titled The Guide to Agile UX Design Sprints, which has been published by UX Pin. Today he will talk about overcoming the hype in user-centered design in relation to innovation. So please join with me and welcome Alex to the stage.
Thanks guys. So my name's Alex and I'm from a place called PwC Digital. And if any of you were reading the New Zealand Herald about this time last year, you would have seen this in the paper. And I'm not just showing you this because it's a photo of me in the paper. I'm showing you it because it actually gives a good description of what PwC Digital does. So we specialise in solving problems and creating opportunities by ensuring better human experiences are always at the heart of the solution we design. Then we help turn these plans into reality, making PwC Digital unique in New Zealand. No one else provides integrated end-to-end digital and experience solutions from strategy right through to execution. And that's the kind of marketing idea of what we do. What we believe at PwC Digital is that we've got this mantra. So we believe that world-class organisations compete on price. Don't compete on price, products or features, they compete on experience. And great experiences are the ultimate drivers of preference, loyalty and advocacy. So basically what we're saying by that is that we believe experience is a new competitive advantage. And I'll just give you a couple of examples to demonstrate this. So this is Netflix, and if you haven't heard of Netflix before then you've probably been living under a rock, but they provide online TV show and movie streaming services. So you pay $10 and you can basically watch as many TV shows and movies as you like. And an interesting thing happened in Sweden when Netflix was launched. So a Swedish research company did a bunch of research and they found that in 2008 there were 260 million downloads of TV shows and movies illegally. And that was the same year that Netflix was released. And then over the next few years, the amount of TV shows and movies that were illegally downloaded decreased by over 50%. So there's a really strong correlation there between Netflix coming on the scene and the amount of TV shows and movies being illegally downloaded decreasing. And the more interesting thing about that for me is that people went from a service which was free. So they went from illegally downloading TV shows and movies which was free. And then they went to another one which they paid $10 for to get the same result. And I believe that people were willing to go from something that's free to something that's paid because of the better experience that Netflix provides. And another example of how experience is a new competitive advantage is with Apple. So a lot of people have probably seen this before. It's the basic supply and demand curve. So the law of this is that if the price of a product goes up, the quantity demanded for it should go down. As the price drops, the quantity demanded should increase. That's the basic law of economics. And what Apple has done is basically flip that on its head. So it's defied the laws of gravity, basically. As the price of their products have gone up, so has the quantity demanded. And I'm specifically talking about the iPhone. So in Q4 of 2014, the iPhone cost about $367 per unit, and they sold 39 million of them. And then in Q4 of 2015, that average cost per unit increased by about $50, and the sales increased by about 10 million, which is ridiculous. And so I believe that that has happened because of the experience that Apple provides with the iPhones. So if it wasn't for that experience, they wouldn't be able to defy the laws of gravity like that. And so the way that people like Apple and Netflix and what we do at PwC Digital is we follow this model. So to describe it, the user is on the outside and the business is in the middle. And so when businesses typically create a new product or service, they think from the inside out. And they say, what technology can we use to create this opportunity? And then what processes does that technology allow us to do? And then what channels can we use on top of that? And then what interactions does that allow us to use? And then at the end, there's an experience. So that's a result of making all those previous decisions. And that experience is quite often handicapped by those previous decisions. And so what we do at PwC Digital is we work from the outside in. And this is what people like Netflix and Apple and Google and all these great companies would do as well. So we say, what is the absolute best experience that we can create? And identify that first. And then we say, what interactions support that experience? What channels allow us to have those interactions? And what processes enable the channels and interactions? And then what technology enables all of this? So we work from the outside in instead of the inside out. And that's how people create these really good experiences. And we've done that for people like Coca-Cola and Frontier with websites and apps. But we don't just use this technique for websites and apps. We've also helped in New Zealand design the Sky Lounge, so aeroplane setting, using exactly the same techniques that we'd use for websites and apps. And we also helped them design their premium economy setting and their business class setting. We've designed parking machines using the same technique, and the interior store design for stores. And so this technique that I'm talking about is human-centered design. It's basically what I'm going to touch on today. So today the point of my talk is I'm talking about overcoming the hype in human-centered design. So it's easy for us, especially the people in this room who are all into user experience design and human-centered design, it's easy for us to get stuck in a certain way of thinking. And it's easy to get stuck believing that human-centered design is the approach that we should take for everything. So I'm going to apply this kind of statement, overcoming the hype in user-centered design, specifically to innovation. So innovation is pretty much the buzziest buzzword in the world right now, right? Everyone's talking about it, everyone's talking about how they can innovate, and companies are starting up their innovation hubs left, right and centre. But I asked myself the question the other day, who does innovation well? So it's easy to think of the big companies like, let's say Apple and 3M has a really good innovation process. But what about these companies that are starting up these innovation hubs? I asked a few colleagues and said, you know, name one product that has been successful and come out of an innovation hub. And we couldn't come up with many examples. And I'd love to hear if anyone here today can think of any examples. So can anyone think of an example of a really good innovative product that has come out of a company's innovation hub before? No? Good. That's good, because that supports the way I'm thinking. Cool. So this is the biggest problem about innovation, is that so many people are talking about it. But what does it actually mean, and how do we actually do it? And so being kind of human-centered and stuff, I thought I'd explore to see how the great human-centered designers have thought about innovation before. So a friend of mine recommended that I read the book How to Kill a Unicorn. And I looked it up on Amazon. I didn't actually end up downloading it. I looked at the reviews, and the reviews actually weren't that great for it. But in the reviews, there was a really good comment that said, instead of reading this book, you should look up this article that was written by Don Norman, who's this guy here. So Don Norman and Roberto Bangatti wrote a academic article together called Incremental and Radical Innovation, Design versus Technology and Meaning Change. So I looked up this article and I read it, and it really changed the way that I look at things, and it inspired me to do this talk today. And it kind of talked about how, it talks about radical and incremental innovation. So to give you an example of what I mean by radical and incremental innovation, I'll talk about how cell phones evolved into smartphones and how we ended up with the iPhones that we have today. So in the early 90s, you would have probably seen people with cell phones like that if you saw anyone with them. So the big old brick cell phone. And the way that Roberto Bangatti and Don Norman talk about radical and incremental innovation is that they have this model here. So this is a graph. On the y-axis, it's got the amount of value, so the higher up the graph, the more value. On the x-axis is the amount of change over time. And these hills will make sense in a second. So if we think about that old brick cell phone, that's at about point A on this graph. Over time, through human-centered design, so once this big brick was created, through human-centered design, all these other cell phone manufacturers developed their cell phones. And so they would research, design, prototype, and test based on the current environment and iterate and build until they ended up something like this, the old Nokia 2280. And this came out in the early 2000s. And so over time, they researched based on the current environment to end up with this. And then, so that basically moved us up this hill. So if point A is the old brick cell phone, point B is the Nokia 2280. And they use human-centered design to climb up from point A to point B. So that's what we call incremental innovation. And that's what human-centered design is, right? It helps us achieve incremental innovation. So radical innovation is the thing that everyone goes after. Radical innovation is, for example, jumping from point B to point C. So jumping from a hill that has a certain amount of value that plateaus at the top. So when we got to the Nokia 2280, it started to plateau in terms of value. And radical innovation is jumping that hill to another hill that has more value. So an example of point C, if point A is the old brick cell phone, point B is the Nokia 2280, point C would be the iPhone, the first iteration of the iPhone. And this was innovative for a bunch of reasons, and it allowed us to jump the hill because it opened this whole new market, right? It allowed us to not only make calls and text messages on our phone, but also access the internet, listen to music, take photos, and download apps. So this is an example of jumping the hill from point B to point C. And then over time, Apple used human-centered design to climb up to point D, which, through using human-centered design, this process, which ended up being the iPhone 6S, which is where we are now. So A to B is incremental innovation, so that's using human-centered design to develop on a current product. B to C is radical innovation, so that's going from something like the Nokia 2280 to the iPhone. So then the question comes up, so how do we actually radically innovate then? And this is one of the questions that a lot of people ask, and I believe that this is one of the reasons why these innovation hubs haven't created anything innovative yet. Because no one knows how to do this. And I'm not claiming that this is my own idea, this is what Don Norman and Roberto Vanguardi were talking about in this article. So how do you actually radically innovate? How do you jump from point B to point C? It's not human-centered design. So we can't use, this is what the theory is, we can't use human-centered design to radically innovate. Which is something that blew my mind, right? Like I was like, no way can that be true because I'm such a believer in human-centered design. And you know, I think it can basically solve the problems of the world. So how come it can't radically innovate? And it's basically because radical innovation is a discontinuation of the past. So what the problem with human-centered design is that it does research based on what currently exists. So we research about the way people are interacting with things, people's current problems, and how we can make those better. And we keep repeating that circle. So that's why it's good for climbing up the hills, for improving what already exists, but it's not good at identifying radical innovation. So in the article, this is an excerpt from the article. So every radical innovation that Don Norman investigated was done without design research or without careful analysis of a person's or even society's needs, which is crazy. And the radical innovations that he researched included the TV, the radio, the first airplane, the first version of Facebook, and the first version of Twitter. So all of these radical innovations were created without human-centered design. So then how do you radically innovate? So there's two ways. First way is that is technology-led, right? So if we think about when the first airplane was created, that was a massive technological innovation. So these guys, the Wright brothers, managed to make a plane fly using propeller and wings and it's technology. And also with the first rocket ship, technology enabled. Not too much human-centered design going on there. And the problem with technology-led innovation is that not all of us can do it, because not all of us are technically skilled. But the good thing is that there's another form of innovation, and that's design-led radical innovation. And by design-led, I mean changing the meaning of what a current product or service is. And that allows us to jump from point B to point C. And an example of a radical innovation happened in the gaming industry. So between Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo, with the Nintendo Wii. So over time, as these consoles were developed, there became a battle started, right? So a battle between Xbox and PlayStation to create better games. And by getting better games, they thought that meant to create more beautiful games and faster games. So that was what their goal was. That's what they kept trying to achieve, and they kept trying to one-up each other with each game and each console that they created. And so they were climbing from point A to point B. So let's imagine that the first iterations of the PlayStation and the Xbox were point A, and the second and third kind of started climbing up to point B. And they were aiming to create these beautiful and fast games. And then along came the Nintendo Wii. So with Xbox and PlayStation, the only way you'd interact with them is using your thumbs. So you'd sit there on a couch or whatever and use your thumbs to play on the controllers. What the Nintendo Wii did was that they didn't have the traditional controller. They had a wand and a remote. And what you do with these is you would use them to physically interact with games. So if you're playing a tennis game, like this example here, you would swing your racket to make your player hit the ball. So they made their games interactive instead of just sitting there with your thumbs. And if you wanted to play a boxing game, you'd actually punch. And if you wanted to bowl a bowling ball, you would do the same motion. And sometimes these interactive games became too interactive. And this guy was trying to do a ski jump. But so Nintendo, instead of interacting with your thumbs, they tried to get the whole body interactive as for people to play their games. But that wasn't the only thing that they tried to do differently to Xbox and PlayStation. They also tried to make their games accessible to everyone. So from people like grandmothers to young kids. And they also didn't really care too much about graphics. So this is a screenshot from one of the first Nintendo Wii games. And then this is one from the equivalent version of the PlayStation. So a dramatic difference in graphics as well. But they managed to jump from point B to point C, Nintendo did. They radically innovated the gaming industry by changing the meaning of what it meant to game. So instead of focusing on good-looking games with good-looking and faster games, they made games more interactive and accessible to everyone. And they radically innovated. They jumped from point B to point C. And what happened next? So they radically innovated. No more fast games. They instead went for interactive ones that everyone could play. And what happened next was that they absolutely smashed it in their sales. So they outsold the Xbox and PlayStation in the period of from about, I think, November 2007 to May 2013, which is amazing, especially since PlayStation and Xbox were already so established in this market. And then what happened next was that Xbox came up with their interactive version of for their games, so you could actually interact using your whole body with the Xbox Connect. And Sony created their wand for the PlayStation, which was similar to what the Wii did. So that really shows how Nintendo radically innovated. And that's how we can innovate as designers, through design-led innovation. So we can change the meaning of something. So designers can radically innovate through meaning change. But how do we actually radically innovate? How do we create meaning change? So this is my methodology that I've come up with based on what Don Norman said. And I've experimented with it a little bit and had some success so far, but it's not yet proven. But I'd like you guys to help me prove it. So the first step in creating radical innovation through meaning change is to innovate for the right reasons. And I think that every company who currently has an innovation hub could use this first step. So this first step is about focusing on outcomes and not outputs. And by that I mean, so outputs are things like an app. So it's a solution, right? So apps are solutions. And another example of an output is a website, so that's another solution. Instead of focusing on solutions, and if anyone comes to PwC Digital saying that we want to create an app, we take them a step back and say, you need to focus on your outcomes, which are goals. So for example, we once had a company who had a foreign exchange trading platform where people logged into this platform to buy and sell currencies, overseas currencies. And the problem that this company had was that, they came to us and they said that they wanted a new website because people were anxious as they were trading currencies on this website. And then we took them a step back and said, why we need to focus on, instead of creating a new website, we need to instead focus on why you want to create a new website. And that was to decrease the amount of anxiety that people have when they trade. And so taking them a step back, it allowed us to focus on other solutions as well, not just creating a website. So we weren't forcing our users down that path for that solution. Instead we said, okay, so maybe more education can help with the anxiety levels around trading. Maybe you can have a concierge service to decrease the anxiety of people making trades in excess of $500,000 or something like that. Because if you make a mistake with that, then you can lose a lot of money. And then on top of that, we also need to look at the website because that's part of the problem. So instead of focusing on outputs in terms of, so for example, creating an app or a website, we need to focus on outcomes, which are the goals that sit behind it. So the funny thing about this is that innovation is an output. So innovation is a solution to our problems. It's not the answer, right? We shouldn't just go out and do it. If we're thinking about innovating, we need to ask ourselves why we want to innovate in the first place. And a good reason to innovate, so innovate, you should only innovate if it will help you achieve your outcomes, okay? And so here's an example of what I mean by that. So let's say that we're a big company. Basically, the market's basically saturated and we have about 90% of the market share in our industry. Pressure's on from the shareholders because they want us to keep increasing profits and make the money, but our revenues plateau because we've got so much of the market share. What we'll do now is we'll come up with an outcome. So instead of jumping to innovation, we'll say to ourselves, how can we identify new revenue generating opportunities? Because that's what the problem is. Our revenue's plateaued and we need to get more of it. And as we ask ourselves this outcome, we can start thinking about different options, different outputs for the solution to this outcome. And those different solutions could be something like investing in a startup, so investing in another company to buy shares in them and increase the revenue for our current company. Another option could be laying staff off, maybe, and then that will increase our profit, but it might have a worse effect on revenue, which is maybe not the best option. But then another option on top of that could be to radically innovate. So that's just one of the many options that you could use to achieve this goal. And it's not something that we should just jump to do. We should only decide to radically innovate if it is the best option to help us achieve our outcomes. So that's step one. We need to focus on outcomes and not outputs when it comes to innovation. So we need to innovate for the right reason. Step two, so we need to start, in order to begin to radically innovate, we need to understand what the meaning of the thing that we're trying to innovate is. So we need to start with the underlying reason why people use use our current service or product that we want to innovate. So for example, let's talk about the insurance industry. So let's say we're an insurance company and we want to radically innovate insurance. So we ask ourselves, why do people have insurance in the first place? And we keep asking ourselves why until we get to the core reason. So let's say that this group of people decided that the core reason people have insurance is to help people get out of difficult situations. So that's the underlying reason why generally people have insurance. So now that we've got that, we can move on to step 3. And a good way to come up with the underlying reason why is just to keep asking yourselves why, until you get to that underlying reason why people do something. The next step is to remove all reference to today. So now that we've got our underlying reason, we want to remove all reference to today. So in order to radically innovate, like I said before, we need to have a discontinuation with the past. And that means that we need to separate our current thinking to this new opportunity. And that's because it's hard to jump the hills if we keep thinking about what we're currently doing, because we'll just keep coming up with current solutions. So in order to do this, we need to get a bunch of outsiders. So we've got our underlying reason why, now we get a bunch of outsiders. And in this case, for insurance, I'm talking about people who don't know much about it at all. And so, for example, this could be, if we're talking about insurance, this could be university students. So they may have not, well, a lot of university students may not have had to deal with insurance their whole life. So their parents probably dealt with it most of their lives, and they've probably never had to sign up for a policy or make a claim before. So a bunch of students would probably be a good group of outsiders for the insurance industry. And so what we do next is that we'll get these students in a room, and we'll say to them, we'll give them the underlying reason why we have insurance. And we will remove all reference to insurance. So we won't say that we're from an insurance company. We won't tell them that they're doing an experiment for insurance. We'll just get these students in a room and give them this challenge. So how might we support people when they get into difficult situations and help them get out of it? And when we give them this statement, we'll get them to design solutions for it. So we'll say, we'll give them 5 minutes and we'll get them to design as many solutions as possible for that statement. And what will happen next is that now that they've designed these solutions from their unique perspective, so without knowing anything about insurance and without having that prevision of what insurance is and without us telling them what, that we're from insurance or leading them in any way that we're doing an insurance project, we'll end up with a bunch of these little hills. So if we go back to our previous hill diagram, what these university students have designed in 5 minutes is probably a bunch of really tiny hills that have very little value. But if we evolve some of these hills, they might end up having more value. So what we do next is we prioritize our hills. So we want to start exploring these hills to actually see how many have value. And we'll do this to begin with to make our time more efficient. We want to prioritize them. And there's a really good scoring matrix in Roberto Vanguardi and Don Norman's article, which is this thing here. And it ranks ideas based on sensory, communication, price, and function. And basically, the higher the score for each hill, the more priority they should have. So next, after we've got the designs and we've got all our small hills, we want to prioritize them using this. After that, we want to create propositions. So by propositions, I mean, you know when the new iPhone comes out and they create a really glossy, nice page of describing what the iPhone does and all its functions. That's the type of thing we want to create for each one of these students' ideas. So for each one of these ideas, we want to create a page like this. So let's say that one of the students thought about, we gave them this challenge and they came up with this idea. And so they said that without any reference to current insurance, they came up with an idea where people pay credits into a system, and it basically goes onto your credits. So each monthly payment goes onto your credits, and you use those credits to get yourself out of trouble once you get into it. So they say that they're kind of like money tree for personal health and fitness. So this person's thinking specifically about health and fitness. And so you put your credits into the system, they earn interest, if you can loan your credits out to other people if they get into trouble to help them out, and they'll pay you back with interest. And you can also earn more credits by doing healthy things to prevent you from getting into trouble in the first place. And your employer can contribute as well. And then if you want to use your credits for when you do get into trouble, you can log into the system and use your credits to go to the doctor or get prescriptions. And then you can use your credits to also go to the gym and prevent yourself from getting into trouble when you do. So once we've created a proposition for each one of these ideas, we'll go out and test those propositions. So this is basic user testing, right, when we test these propositions. So we'll create one for each idea that basically describes each idea in a realistic way, and then we'll go out and test them to see if people like them or not. So the first person may not like the propositions, the next person might, the next person may not. But what we've done now is that we've actually just started to see that some of these small hills, they actually have more value than what we currently thought. So by testing them, we can see what ones are promising and what ones aren't. And then after that, we can use human-centered design to climb the most promising hills. So now that we've got all these university students to create these ideas, we've got these small hills, and we've removed all reference to the current insurance, and they've come up with all these new fresh ideas, and we've identified the best ones, we can now use human-centered design to climb the most promising hills. And that's the process of researching, designing, prototyping, and testing, and repeating that until we grow the hills even higher. And who knows, out of one of these ideas that these students created, one hill may be huge like this and create a lot of value, and we may radically innovate insurance. So, in summary, there's 7 steps that I believe you can use to create radical innovation. And we'll run through those today. What you guys should do now is definitely go and download this article. It may look a bit dry from the title, but it is really interesting. And when you get to that human-centered design phase, you should download my book that I wrote. So this is the guide to Agile UX design sprints, and I wrote it for UXPin. And this is a free download, so you can use that to get a good description and guide, step-by-step process as to how to run human-centered design in a lean and agile way. And if you want any help with innovation, or you want to know more about this innovation technique, then feel free to send me an email on alex.gamble@nz.pwc.com, or send me a message or a phone call. Thanks, guys.
So yeah, I think we've got time for a couple of questions for Alex. So have we got anybody here in the audience who would like to ask Alex a question? Anybody? I've got one question anyway that I could start with. See what happens. So yeah, I just remember the time back probably in around '99 sort of thing, and there was a survey that was put out that I always remember where people did have those old Nokia phones, and they went and surveyed like a sort of almost a global audience and asked them, would you want internet on your cell phone, on your phone? And pretty much the majority of the people, I'm not exactly sure what the figures were, but 80-odd% of the survey results said no. We would not want internet on our phones. What the hell would you use internet on your phone for? We use it for talking.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about the fact that, obviously for radical, you almost have to ignore what your customers are saying?
Yeah. And I think that's exactly what Don Norman and Roberto Bengardi are talking about in that article, is that if you use human-centered design, people can't kind of imagine a solution past what currently exists. So yeah, definitely. I've also heard another example about if you ask people when they had the Nokia 2280s, how would they feel if they didn't have buttons on their phone? And they would have said you're crazy, because how else are we going to interact with our phone if it doesn't have any buttons? But then a couple of years later, with the iPhone, they had a touchscreen, and everyone loved it. So so that's the kind of the main principle that these guys have been trying to get at, is that you almost have to remove yourself from human-centered design to find that new hill to climb. But then once you get there, once you find something promising, you need to use human-centered design to develop that idea into something great. So from going from the iPhone 1 to the iPhone 6s.
So yeah, that's obviously it's really difficult, right? Because I think we saw this morning that CEO of Microsoft made quite a big mistake and thought that the iPhone wasn't going to be very successful because it had digital button.
Yeah.
But, you know, and so obviously it's quite a hard thing to identify in those first iterations. So at PwC, how do you guys, when you see your hills, how do you sort of identify which ones might have more value? Because obviously it can be quite touch and go as to which ones may be more successful.
Yeah, definitely. So the way, so with the hills, like an example with the insurance, you know, you can start with a bunch of hills. So you do an ideation exercise to come up with a bunch of new hills. And you literally have no idea what hill is going to be successful until you start testing it, until you start actually putting it out in front of people and getting their reactions to it. So we literally don't know when we get presented with hills. And that's where that human-centered design comes back in, to start identifying how people will react to this thing if it actually was real. Not asking them like our examples of the Nokia phones with the internet and buttons. Not asking them how they'd feel if this idea existed, but actually creating it in a really lean form and putting it in front of them and seeing how they react to it. And then from there we can start to prioritise hills and then climb them using human-centered design.
Great. Okay, thanks, Alex. I probably don't want to hold everybody up anymore because we're going to move to a quick break. So there'll be some snacks outside. But yeah, if everyone enjoyed that and there's no more questions, let's put a round of applause together for Alex.